Hello everyone, I am Demented Kirby, and welcome to my channel, the Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews and other deck techs. On this episode of the Brewery, I'll be discussing my take on a recently spoiled commander from Kaldheim, Koll the Forgemaster. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel. The best way you can help support the channel is with my Patreon. For just $1, pages get early access to certain videos on YouTube, while higher tier pages get access to the VIP section of my Discord server as well. You can find a link to both down in the description. In fact, patrons got a chance to see this video earlier. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Koll is a 2/2 dwarf warrior for 1 red and 1 white. I'm surprised he isn't an artificer, since he has the title of Forgemaster, but I digress. In any case, he has an amazing ability that allows for plenty of combo hijinks. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, if it was enchanted or equipped, it returns to your hand. This allows for some serious combo potential, especially with how cheap he is to cast, so you really don't have to worry that much about protecting him until you're going to start comboing off. As a bonus, he gives your creature tokens +1/+1 as long as they're equipped or enchanted. However, that isn't the direction I built this deck in. That being said, let's see how we're going to abuse his first ability for game-ending combos. The best equipment for the main combo in the deck are Lightning Greaves, Ronin War Club, Scythe of the Shinobi, and Stormrider Rig. The Greaves are great because they equip for 0, but are also a commander staple, so it logistically doesn't take up a slot in the deck. The other 3 are key because they automatically attach themselves to a creature when it enters the battlefield. This is important because we don't want to spend mana in this combo. We want to combo off as easily as possible. This is why the deck's running Crimson Kobolds, Crookshank Kobolds, Kobolds of Kirkheap, and Rockrat, Son of Rogrok. These zero-costed creatures are what combo with the aforementioned equipment. With Koll on the battlefield, if any of these creatures are equipped when they die, they return to our hand. Thus, if we had a free sacrifice outlet, we could begin an infinite loop. Memnite and Ornithopter are also included for redundancy and are arguably better, since being artifacts allows for them to be tutored for much easier than the previously mentioned kobolds. Let's see some of the many ways this combo can win us the game. Assuming we have Koll and Scythe of the Shinobi on the battlefield with Rogrok in our hand. When we cast him for 0 and have him enter the battlefield, the Scythe gets auto-equipped to him. We can now use a free sacrifice outlet to win because Rogrok will return to our hand after he dies thanks to Koll. We can then recast him again afterwards. If uninterrupted, we win. With a free sacrifice outlet like Altar of Dementia, we can potentially win by milling out our opponents. Granted, we won't be able to mill out anyone with cards that shuffle themselves back into the library, but it's still a free sacrifice outlet as well as potential win con. Goblin Bombardment is another free sacrifice outlet that is more reliable than the Altar since it pings opponent's face. This can very easily deal infinite damage with this loot. On their own, these can win us the game, but we can still win with other free sacrifice outlets like Ashland's Altar and Phyrexian Altar. Either way, these are amazing on their own since they can be used to generate mana as well as powering engines like the ones in this deck. With the same example as before, if we just had one of these altars, it's not enough to win the game unless we have a mana sink, but at least they're free sacrifice outlets. Same goes for Fanatical Devotion and Martyr's Cause. These cards are still good on their own because they provide relevant responses in terms of defense. However, as I mentioned earlier, these are not enough to win. But if we had something like Aetherflux Reservoir on the battlefield, we can gain infinite life and then use 50 each time to kill off an opponent. Since we're actually casting these zero-costed creatures each time, they will trigger the reservoir, gaining us enough life to kill off the table. Perverse God of the Forge and Impact Tremors don't trigger off casting, but each time any zero-costed creature is entering the battlefield, they will trigger and thus kill off the entire table. So, while needing an additional card for this engine to provide a win con via infinity, the redundant effects are plentiful enough in the deck that we can assemble an infinitely looping win con engine fairly easily. Another similar engine is with Dockside Extortionist and Mask of Immolation. As long as the Extortionist creates at least 4 treasures when it enters the battlefield, we will have enough to equip the mask and then recast it. With Koll on the battlefield, when we sacrifice the Extortionist to the mask's ability, it will deal 1 damage and then the Extortionist returns to our hand. So with the remaining treasures, we can cast the Extortionist and do it all over again. Dockside Extortionist is also just a great card in general since it provides some epic mana acceleration in the multiplayer game. Even if we don't assemble a win con, just going infinite is enough to eventually get there. With Skull Clamp, we can use those sacrifices to draw 2 cards each time. So if we're using any of the mana generating altars to sacrifice the equipped creature, we can use that mana to pay for Skull Clamp's cost and dig through our deck until we find the win con. Or, as mentioned earlier, we can tutor for it with Stoneforge Mystic, Open the Armory, or Enlightened Tutor. While the first 2 are pretty much only to get any equipment we might need for the loop, Enlightened Tutor can actually tutor for a zero-costed creature thanks to Memnite and Ornithopter, remember? The only reason I'm running more free kobolds than free artifact creatures is because they also die to artifact hate, so having 2 backup zero-costed artifact creatures is fine enough. Another self-sacrificing engine is thanks to Burnished Heart. If it's equipped, preferably with something that auto-equips or equips for free, then when we activate it for ramps for basic lands, it'll return to our hand afterwards. Granted, this is essentially paying 6 mana each time to ramp for 2 basic lands, but in red-white, beggars can't be choosers. As for other ways of assembling the combo, red-white isn't that nerfed when it comes to card advantage. The decks running Thrill of Possibility, Seize the Spoils, Tormented Voice, Faithless Looting, Wild Guess, and Cathartic Reunion to burn through our library, no pun intended. The new card on the block, Seize the Spoils, is essentially good since we get treasure when we cast it. Magus of the Wheel, Wheel of Misfortune, and Reforge the Soul take it a step further by replacing our hand entirely. The Magus in particular is incredibly busted in this deck. If we equip it with anything before we activate its ability, it returns to our hand afterwards. If we stack our effects accordingly, then its wheel effect will resolve before Koll's trigger resolve. Thus, we get our new hand, and then the Magus goes back into our hand in order to recast it later on. Due to how Wheel of Fortune is presently a 250 plus card when it used to be about $10 8 years ago, I will no longer recommend it in my deck text. If you already have it, then great. At least Wheel of Misfortune is a decent enough substitute if you manage to not lose its minigame. Alms Collector and Smothering Tide make it worth even more to wheel the table, especially if we're able to consistently wheel the table with Magus of the Wheel. Even then, both of these cards are great on their own as classic white stacks pieces. Alkut Awakening is a kind of wheel effect, but we don't discard our hand, we choose what's a bottom deck and then draw that amount of cards. Since the average CMC of the deck is fairly low, this is equally useful as its back face is Valakut's Thorn Forge. It does enter the battlefield tapped, but very few lands in the deck do, so it's not that big of a deal. Other draw effects are thanks to the Impulsive Draw found on Showdown of the Skalds, Jessica's Will, and Chandra Throne of Defiance. The Saga is amazing since it's essentially draw 4 cards for 4 mana unless we exile too many lands. Since we have until our next turn to play them, we're golden since most of the deck's spells are incredibly cheap. Jessica's Will has the added bonus of also giving us a ton of mana. If we control Koll, then we can choose both modes. Chandra is amazing here since she can either accelerate our mana or card advantage all without losing loyalty. War Room just straight up draws us a card at the cost of 3 mana and 2 life. It's on a mana generating land that doesn't enter the battlefield tapped, so it doesn't take up a slot in the deck. So many draw effects are also useful to help us dig for any responses we might need. The deck's running Red Elemental Blast and Pyro Blast to help us protect our combo. Opponents won't expect counterspells in a red-white deck, and that's their downfall if they do. It should be noted that these are also great removal spells for blue permanents. Either way, Grand Abolisher is also included to prevent opponents doing anything during our turn anyways. That way, our combo is relatively uninterruptible. Speaking of which, Drannith Magistrate and Aven Mind Sensor are 2 more amazing white cards in the deck to aggravate and control opponents a bit. The Magistrate is just an all-around evil card that can really set opponents back, but the Mind Sensor is crucial at preventing opponents from tutoring for any responses to our engines and combos. It also slows down ramp decks if they can't find that land in the top 4 cards of their library. Who says white is bad? Teferi's Protection and Boros Charm also help in not just protecting our combo, but our board state. Even though thanks to Koll, any equipped creatures will return to our hand if they die, we don't want to lose our non-creature combo pieces either. Speaking of Koll, Swiftfoot Boots is a good way to protect him from targeted spells and effects, but better than that is Sword of the Realms. If Koll is equipped by this sword, then he will essentially have his own ability, returning to our hand if he should die when equipped by it. Same goes for any key creature on the battlefield. As for responses of our own, the deck's running Wrath of God and Blasphemous Act in case we're facing against decks with a heavy creature count or token decks. The deck has a low creature count and most creatures are just combo pieces or hate pieces. We don't really suffer wraths as our opponents would thanks to Koll. Austere Command is a situational catch-all while Vandal Blast can destroy all artifacts we don't control, really setting the table back. These are pretty self-explanatory, so let's continue on. We're in Tear can do the same for a single artifact and or enchantment at instant speed. Path to Exile and Source to Plowshares can get rid of pesky indestructible creatures at instant speed, while Chaos Warp and Generous Gift can get rid of absolutely any permanent at instant speed. Again, these spells are pretty self-explanatory since no commander deck should be without sufficient responses. Shatterskull Smashing is another great response included as a land slot in the deck thanks to Shatterskull the Hammer Pass, having the potential of entering the battlefield untapped if we needed the land drop instead. Again, the deck has very low average CMC, but sometimes RNGs will abandon you, so it's good to have some things to put luck back with your favor. As for how we're powering our own strategy, we do have some decent enough mana acceleration in the deck besides the other synergistic ways I have previously mentioned. Keeper of the Court is a solid inclusion since the deck is running so few lands, of which 7 of them are basic planes, but so few creatures too, so this mono white savior will definitely pull its weight in the deck. Forging the Tyrite Sword is another amazing new card for the deck. It costs 3 mana and creates a treasure when it enters the battlefield as well as during your next draw step. However, its final chapter gets us Halvar God of Battle or any equipment card into our hand. So not only is this another equipment tutor for our combos, but keep in mind that Halvar is the front face of Sword of the Realms, which is what we use to protect Koll from death. Finally, the deck's running Soul Ring, Mana Crypt, Arcane Signet, Boros Signet, and Talisman of Conviction, which don't really require any further explanation than your run-of-the-mill mana rocks needed for red-white decks, since land wrap effects are very few and far between for red-white. At least the previous Koll Burnished Heart combo mentioned earlier, we can ramp for 2 basics each time, essentially for 6 mana. The rest of the decks is just directed at lands. The deck's running all 8 fetch lands, Plateau, Sacred Foundry, Alpine Meadow, Command Tower, City of Brass, Mana Confluence, Sunbaked Canyon, Battlefield Forge, and Ancient Tomb, as well as 7 of each snow-covered basic lands in case anyone's running anything that benefits us for it. As always, Plateau, the more expensive fetch lands, and Mana Crypts aren't entirely necessary for the deck to run, and you can just as easily swap them out for any budget substitutes and the deck will still run just fine. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Koll the Forgemaster. Finally, another combo-centric red-white commander that isn't dependent on combat. Granted, it's still an equipment matters commander, but at least it's used to power combos that can very easily go infinite. Hopefully we can get more variety for red-white commanders in the future. Before ending this episode, keep in mind that I completely ignored Koll's second ability, and you can very easily build an aggro deck with a Token Storm strategy with Koll that combines equipment too. But I just found this to be a better way to build him, in my opinion. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the Brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link, that also helps out the channel. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of the Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am Demented Kirby, and happy brewing.